Welcome to Woody's Weekly Wisdom, episode number 10. We're into double digits. And this week, I'm excited, I guess. It's not the right thing to be excited about, but I'm excited that finally somebody else is coming out and talking about and confirming what I've been saying about interest rates and inflation for a few months now, and particularly on these weekly wisdoms. I've talked about it, alluded to it. But the simple fact is that these constant interest rate hikes that we've been copying both here in Australia and overseas and other parts of the world, I know the US has started to slow down as well, but most of the world has been hit with these sledgehammer interest rate hikes. And today, or earlier this week, I noticed that Deloitte's have come out and basically said that the Reserve Bank is using the wrong tool, and that's what I've been saying for a while now. So are the economies on a knife edge? Who really knows? But this article suggests that the hikes back in February and March were unnecessary. So there it is, right there, unnecessary, and left the Australian market facing the weakest rate of economic growth outside of the pandemic since the recessions of the early 1990s. So that's a pretty fearful statement, and who knows whether or not we will actually go into recession. And in fact, I think Deloitte's, even though they make this, statement later in this article, they actually say they don't think the Australian economy will go into recession. And I believe that's also what's being talked about with the US economy as well. And I guess if the US does go into a recession, then most of the rest of the world will as well. But I like this part here. The RBA is fighting inflation with the wrong weapon. And so this is what I've been talking about for weeks now, and maybe even months, is that the inflation that we've been facing and seeing, and the fact that it's so excessive, would in ordinary times suggest that mums and dads are out there spending like rabbits, wild rabbits out there just spending, hand over fist, and that's what's driving inflation. But again, I've been saying that that's not necessarily the case, and it's not consumer-driven inflation like they're saying here, but in fact it's inflation caused by other things. So more to do with congestion in global supply chains, higher energy prices, elevated transport costs, which are causing increases in the price of final and intermediate goods. So this is what I've been saying, in that it's hard to use interest rates to stop us from spending when the prices of things that are included in the inflation calculations are going up, irrespective of the spending that we're doing. Like, let's face it, electricity is not something that people go and spend more of because they just love it. They use it because they need it. And it's not something that we just wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to use more electricity today because I've got heaps of money in my bank account. That's not how it works, of course. But inflation has been driven by these pressures that are outside of our control, that have forced things like electricity prices to go up. And then you've had the whole global supply chain has been disrupted by war, by COVID, and all these other things. Again, when we wake up in the morning, we have no control over these things, and yet they have resulted in prices going up, and a whole host of goods and services that are then included in the inflation calculation. Yet governments keep telling us, and reserve banks keep telling us, that we have to slow down our spending because it's causing this outrageous inflation. So to stop us, we're going to whack you with more interest rate hikes. It just doesn't make sense, hasn't made sense for some time. And I'm glad that at last we're starting to see other people, who supposedly respected consulting firms are now bringing a blowtorch to this dilemma. So, it's prompted the consulting firm, Deloitte that is, to downgrade its forecast for Australia's economic growth. Well, no shit, Sherlock. If you rape and pillage people's bank accounts by making them pay excessive interest on mortgages, which is in most cases people's biggest expense, then they're not going to have any money to spend on other things, which slows the economy down, which then leads to the other problem. If we slow the economy down, we then lose jobs and the economy starts to shrink, and governments have to start taking active measures to get us back spending so that we can increase jobs again and grow the economy. Everyone needs a growing economy. And so, like I've said for many, many weeks, this is a ridiculous scenario that we're facing where we're using interest rates to try and stop spending for costs that are beyond our control. And there's a whole heap of stuff in here about all the technicalities and all that type of stuff. But in just 10 months, the cost of servicing an average $600,000 mortgage will have risen by more than $14,000 per year, $1,200 odd a month, and that is a massive hike for people to find. And like I've been saying in some of our earlier weekly wisdoms, which you can watch by if you go to YouTube, you can check them out there. What I've been saying is that this $1,200 is a month for the average $600,000 mortgage is okay for those, or it's not okay, but it's being felt by those people who are on variable rates. But think about those people who are coming off fixed interest rates that are much, much lower and are going to have to start forking out $1,200 to $1,500 a month more than they already are. And the impact that will have on the level of spending, and the impact that will have on the topic we talked about last week, where people are going to end up in a mortgage prison because they're no longer able to refinance because they would fail the application process because of the amount that rates have risen by. So they're trapped. They can't even negotiate a lower rate because they would fail the application process for a new loan with a new lender. So at best, they can ring their current bank and ask them to reduce the rate, which they may or may not do, but they certainly won't do to the point where they get it back to levels that might be competitive with some of the non-major banks. And so this is just a continuation of the problem that I know you guys are facing when it comes to growing your wealth, when your biggest expense, housing, is chewing up any reserves that you may have had, and certainly chewing up any reserves you may have had in your monthly spending as well. So I know there's lots of people out there who are tapping into their savings to help them cover these additional costs, and at the same time they're not being able to add to their savings because they're having a monthly shortfall. And so that ultimately is not a winning scenario for anybody, whether it's the household, the economy, or the government. All three are going to be losers in this scenario if it becomes protracted. So, on these numbers, at least 300 Australian households may currently be experiencing negative cash flow. Now, I saw another article during the week that showed these numbers in cold hard reality, and it is pretty scary that there is a very large volume of homes that are going to be struggling if these rates continue to go up or even stay at these levels for much longer. And we're hearing that there's still potentially one or two more rate rises, which just begs belief. Particularly when you see this, the Reserve Bank's walking a very narrow path to curb inflation. It's very, very, very tight as to what will be the next move. And the government and the Reserve Bank and the Federal Reserve in the US and their governments, they don't want recessions because that's just a whole amount of pain for everybody. So we need to just keep going with the flow of information, staying on top of what's happening. And I think Now, what this is telling us is that there's a lot of warning signs out there that is going to cause, I guess, some more pause. Even though the Reserve Bank in Australia has come out and said the decision of whether to increase or not in March was a close run thing. Well, no, or it was probably April. Sorry, it was a close run thing. I think there's a lot of data showing up that may very well just paint that picture of, hang on, we really do need to pause a little bit and forecast annual growth. So this is something that they like to see, and this is across all the states of Australia. They much prefer to see these numbers up around 3%, and you can see we're a long way below those. So without that growth, the economy doesn't produce more jobs, and without those jobs and without that growth, the economy slows and stalls, makes it harder for the government to raise revenue to produce and do the things that government needs to do to keep us all happy. New buildings, new hospitals, more police, all that type of stuff. That all slows down. It's very difficult in an environment that we're heading towards. So there's going to be a lot of attention on these numbers in coming weeks and months to make sure that that they don't push us over the cliff. So where was it? All the way up here, very narrow path, and I think it was further up. They were talking about the cliff. So are we headed for a recession? Who knows? Probably not. Because you would hope that they will take action before we get to that point. But I guess what Deloitte is saying is that that consumer spending is definitely going to contract because we've had all our spare capacity taken away from us. It then becomes a case of how much further do they go, and what impact that will have on the Australian and world economies. So that's Woody's Weekly Wisdom number 10 for this week. As I said, these are all about just giving you an idea of what's been going on in the headlines to give you an understanding of how that might play out in your wealth equation. Right now, if you're struggling with really tight cash flow, then do your best if you can to address things outside of your housing. It still doesn't hurt to ring the bank and see if they will give you a discount in some way to just take some of that pressure off. And then obviously you then have to feed that into other areas and see where you can contract a little bit in these times where cash flow is going to be tight. Hopefully that was helpful. Leave me a comment, let me know down below, and I'll see you again next week. Cheers.